Module 11. I, Dr. Rita Pratap, Associate Professor, Department of Drawing and Painting, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. I am going to speak on pre-Mughal painting. The styles of miniature painting that flourished in the pre-Mughal courts of the Muslim sultanates have rather precarious chronology. The period was characterized by intense religious fervor expressed in the passionate devotionalism. It witnessed the intermingling of two cultural sensibilities, the indigenous and the Islamic, which was reflected vividly not only in painting but in architecture, music, and literature. Following up the existing norms of manuscript illumination, the painter's techniques. Following up the existing norms of manuscript illumination, the painter's techniques, sources of inspiration, and levels of talent were disparate. Although short-lived, these styles played an important role in the emergence of the Mughal idiom in Akbar's imperial atelier. Most of the themes were taken up from visual elaboration, were derived from legends' artistic individuality, and the painter's responsiveness to an individual's pattern's demand. The two key factors in the growth of Mughal painting were of little importance at this stage. Absence of sufficient dated materials marks the history of painting during the rule of Mamluk Sultans dated to AD 1192 to 1298. The Khiljis dated to 1290 to 1320. The Tughlaqs AD 1320 to 1414. The Sayyids AD 1414 to 1451 in northern India. Nevertheless, delightful details are provided by the sporadic references to painting in the literary works of the Sultanate era. Masood Bak, a mystical poet of Firoz Shah Tughlaq's reign, AD 1351 to 1388, compared the creator to a maker of painted images. The designer Naqash, who without instruments make a picture, tasveer, see that the painter Musawwir is not separate from the image, surat. In the eye of the contemplation should be opened. In the depth of each picture, Naqash, you will behold what thing is. It is Chandayana, translated by S. Digby. Firoz Shah, whose fanaticism and religious bigotry was a legend, banned wall decoration with animate subjects. Several contemporary Hindi poems repeatedly refer to a Hindu tradition of figurative wall painting that survived in northern India. The Mulla Daud's Lord Chanda or Chandayana, the story of Chanda, gives an exquisite description of wall decoration in gold on red background. The pavilion was garnished with red decoration and the pictures and painting made golden. A picture of Lanka and the light of Vibhishan, and the body of Ravana as if real, the seizing of Sita, the battling of Rama, Duryodhan and the Pandavas at the place of Kurukshetra, the black thief and the white gambler, Ajia the vampire in Ujjain city, various kinds of lions, Singh and Sardulas and deer, Mriga are in the animal forest. A twilight otherworld of tales and poems inscribed in a long line there. Chandayana, stanza 205. The close of the Tughlaq regime saw the establishment of the independent provincial kingdoms at Gujarat, Malwa and Jaunpur. Itinerant painters from Persia were attracted to these centers of culture. Illustrated as well as unillustrated Persian manuscripts, usually of Bukhara and Shiraz style, made their way into royal libraries. A cultural renaissance took place under the Lodis, dated to 1451 to 1526, some of whom had a literary leaning. though they never patronized painting. A good number of illustrated and dated manuscripts covering Islamic and Hindu themes have surfaced. The Islamic manuscripts are marked by a lyrical and idealized style, whereas the Hindu manuscripts are full of vigor and sensuous charm. Bhakti or intense religious fervor hastened the transformation of the existing forms of religious, cultural, literary, and aesthetic expression of this era. Vernacular languages absorbed the classical influences and drew from Sanskrit literature, Awadhi and Braj Bhasha. The two major constituents of Hindi were employed for the enormous body of Vaishnav literature. Relevant here is the role of Sufi poets who introduced new senses of the Perso Arabic literary tradition into the vernaculars. Along the Sanskrit texts, these literary works in vernacular languages motivated the painters. Love, human or divine, continued as the dominant theme, suitably couched in narrative situations. The second successor on the throne of Mandu, Muhammad I, dated to 1463 to 1469, wrote a poetry in Hindi language, sent and received embassies from Bukhara, and was just both Muslims and Hindus. His son Gyasuddin Khilji, dated to 1469 to 1501, was a colorful prince, an aesthete and a lover of women. There was much coming and going of emissaries and men of culture from the Mandu court to other kingdoms. The spring festival became an annual event under Gyasuddin. Plate 1 shows an illustrated Jain Kalpsutra in Mandu dated to 1439 AD. The painting in this manuscript had the usual red flat backgrounds and 3/4 face with the further eye. The elements are not so compressed in space. The treatment of the elephant, of the jetting palla of the female, and the skyline is similar in this Mandu Kalpsutra to the Kalpsutra from Jaunpur dated to 1465 AD. The two illustrated series of Lord Chanda are outstanding representation of the captivating romances in Avdi or the legends of the Islamic world. The style may not be noticed in one group of manuscripts dating back to 1450 to 1470. They possibly came from Delhi Jaunpur belt. The poem expresses the eternally enduring relation between the mystic and his divine beloved in the language of human love, which is typical of Sufi verse. Some of the salient aspects of its style are the division of the vertical format of the folios in the registers, the highly suggestive simplification of human and animal forms, and the use of swift, wiry lines to demarcate angular features. Ultramarine, vermilion, yellow ochre, and white color create a brilliant effect enhanced by the black outline. A beautiful example in plate 2 is of a Maina talking with the caravan master, Pre-Mughal Lord Chanda manuscript dated to 1450 and in the collection of Bharat Kala Bhavan, Banaras. The manuscript produced between 1490-1510 at Mandu in central India are the manuscripts of cookery book called Niyamat Nama, Book of Delicacies, which was discovered in the Indian Office Library. All the 50 miniatures of the Niyamat Nama includes the favorite dishes and herbal mixtures of Sultan Gyasuddin Khilji of Malwa, who ruled from 1469 to 1500, and by his son Nasir Uddin Khilji during his 11-year reign 1500 to 1511. Chinese foliated clouds, rounded hillocks, sumptuously painted tapestry of foliage, and well-constructed tanks with lotuses and birds create the ideal background for the leisure activities engaging the ruler. He is the only man to be portrayed in the entire manuscript All the other are large-eyed ladies of the seraglio wearing Persian gowns and turbans or dressed up in a richly patterned ghagras, skirts, and transparent odhnis, wimples. Art historians are of the opinion that an itinerant Persian painter was assisted by an Indian apprentice eager to imitate his master's studied refinement of the Herat school. An example of plate 3 shows Niyamat Nama, Book of Delicacies of Ghiyasuddin Khilji, dated to 1469 to 1501, belonging to Mandu and from the collection of India Office Library, London. Another example is Sultan of Mandu directing the preparation of sweets, pre-Mughal Niyamatnama manuscripts dated to 1490, 1510 and in the collection of India Office Library. The influence of Niyamatnama travelled towards nearby Mewar, Bundi and Kota, towards Bundelkhand to the Deccan whenever Sultan Nasiruddin's son of Ghiyasuddin Khilji had contacts. The other outstanding manuscripts worth mentioning are Miftah al-Fuzala, a glossary of rare words, and Sadi Bustan's The Orchard, done in Turkoman style, Shiraz and Herat. The Sadi's Bustan, painted in Mandu in 1503 and written by the calligrapher Shahawar and illustrated by the artist Haji Muhammad. Certainly it is not a well done as the highly skillful work in the Herat, Shiraz and Tabriz studios of the time, where the great schools of Persian paintings were forming into masterly achievements of Behzad and other painters. But its execution in Mandu shows that the central Indian court was in touch with the culture of the court of Sultan Hussain Mirza. Except for the color schemes, the Mandu Bustan paintings have nothing very much of India about them. There is a rectangular band filled with floral scrolls. An example in plate 5 shows page from Bastan of Sadi painted in Mandu by Haji Muhammad, written by calligrapher Shahawar 1503. A bunch of illustrated manuscripts of Sanskrit devotional literature, Avdi romances and of Ragmala text, garland of musical modes, form a fascinating group popularly referred to as Chaur Panchashika. The dynamic brushwork and vigorous symbolism of this idiom found widespread expression, with subtle regional variations in the 16th century. It was centered mainly in Delhi-Jaunpur belt, but possibly extended to other regions, that is Rajasthan, Malwa and Punjab hills. During the reign of Sikandar Shah Lodi, the two dated manuscripts were, the earlier one is Arnaika Parv, the forest book, and the third section of Mahabharata of 1516, painted at Kachuva, Agra. The later example, an exceptional discovery, is a Devi Mahatmya, the glorification of great goddess, completed in 1574 at Jaisingh Devanagar, Kangra. Here, the style painted is aimed at clarity of narration and vivid visual effects persisted side by side with the experiments of the royal workshop of Akbar. Lines of uniform thickness having a steely strength became the essential means of articulation. Scale relationships between the human figures and the landscapes were invariably disregarded. For the sake of clarity, the full page compositions were invariably divided into registers. Each one represented a portion of the episode. Architecture with distinctly defined parts looked like painted cutouts. The colors used by the painters was blazing red in backgrounds to highlight certain segments of the narration. Fine detailing of the creeper and twin trees evoked the mood of an everlasting spring. The female figures with flamboyantly curvaceous torsos displayed a tautness characteristics of the Jaina idiom. They are shown wearing tight blouses, patterned skirts, and diaphanous odenis with ends standing out at sharp angles. The male figures are dressed in dhotis and uttariyas, graceful scarves, or in chakdar jamas, tunics tightly held around the waist with the patka sash. Another predominant male sartorial feature is the Afghan skull cap tied with the turban. The faces are all standardized profiles with prominent, wide open eyes, lively hand gestures, and movement of limbs convey the emotions. The Mrigavati series is a strange tale of love, fantasy, magic, and supernatural. It follows as the known formula of the Chaur Panchashika, which verges on folklore. The Mrigavati illustrations of an Awadh romance in the collection of Bharat Kala Bhavan Banaras are simpler and more stylized and still echo the angularities of the Jaina styles. Again, the further eye has disappeared and been replaced by the big fish eye. The composition is more emotional and the pronounced edges of costumes as well as the gestures of the figures are used to energize the scenes. The khulledar turban and the Islamic jama appears with the geometric sash. An example of the above type is an illustration from Mrigvati Avdhi romance related to Chaur Panchashika style and Geet Govind of Prince of Wales Museum dated to 1606 AD and in the collection of Bharat Kala Bhavan ascribed to 1540 AD. Another example is of a Prince Biraspat as yogi in search of Princess Mrigavat belonging to pre-Mughal period dated to 1560 and at present in Bharat Kala Bhavan, Banaras. The two illustrated copies of Jaydev's Geet Govind, the song of the cowherd god, shows the landscape of Vrindavan with the lotus-laden river Yamuna, flowering bowers, stately plantains, and brightly plumed peacocks. An example is of Krishna and Radha seated in a grove, pre-Mughal Geet Govind manuscript dated to 1570 and at present in the National Museum, New Delhi. Another painting of the same Geet Govind manuscript is of Krishna pines for Radha in the grove, while the confidant persuades the latter for reconciliation. This is a pre-Mughal painting dated to 1570 National Museum, New Delhi collection. Krishna with gopis in a grove. The Geet Govind set from the Prince of Wales Museum, Bombay dated to about 1540 AD. Here the early Rajasthani style also begins to eliminate the Jain for the eye and introduces the big fish eye. The abstract sharp nose now tends to disappear, the square head with rounded face and volumes of the human figure emerge against a glowing background. According to art historian Professor Pramod Chandra, the series seems to have received some Muslim influence, though the trees and the foliage and the lush background relates these pictures more to Mewar. The emphatic the emphatic Hinduization of Mandu under Muhammad II and his minister Medni Rai may have led to the absorption much Sabbatarian folk culture in the Mandu court. In 1531, Muslim ruler of Gujarat, apprehensive about the decay of Islamic culture which might begin through the undue influence of Medni Rai on Muhammad II, attacked Mandu and ended the Khalji dynasty. During the next quarter of a century, Mandu was ruled by Pathan dynasty of whom Sultan Bayazid, popularly known as Baz Bahadur, was the most illustrious. The prince cultivated indigenous classical music, wrote poetry in Hindi and fell in love with a Hindu beauty, Roopmati, who was also a fine musician. The legend of Baz Bahadur's dalliance with Roopmati spread. Laila Majnu, Shirin and Farhad and Dhola Maru were some inner longings where folk symbols were adopted. One can find some sets of paintings of Mewar, Jaunpur and Malwa which have common features. The houses with tent-like sharp triangular tops, the full-breasted woman taken over from the Kalpsutra style occur. An example is of Majnu weeping at Laila's grave. Sultanate painting from Avdi Romance Jaunpur shows the lovers Champavati and Vilhan dated to 1525 to 1570, now in the Culture Centre, Ahmedabad. Two pages from a manuscript of Lord Chanda, Chandayana style, North India, dated to 1525 to 1560. These 73 pages are from a manuscript known as the Prince of Wales Lord Chanda or the Prince of Wales Chandayana, composed in 1379 by Maulana Daud of Dalmau in Uttar Pradesh, Rai Bareli district. The Lord Chanda tells the romance between the hero Lorak and his lover Chanda, daughter of Sahadeva, ruler of Gowar. The text is composed in Awadh language and written during the reign of Firoz Shah Tughlaq, Sultan of Delhi. At least 5 illustrated manuscripts of Lord Chanda have survived from the pre-Mughal period, indicating that the text was very popular. The Prince of Wales, Lord Chanda, is perhaps the most popular and interesting pre-Mughal Indian manuscripts. Its illustrations are rendered in a sophisticated idiom that is related to both Chaura and the Indo-Persian styles of paintings. The figural types are smooth, less angular versions of those seen in the Chaura style manuscripts. The costumes are distinctively Indian, curling clouds with paler palettes. Varied arabesques are derived from Islamic painting. Another example of the pre-Mughal painting is the Khan-e-Jahan dispenses justice from the Virginia Museum collection. This painting shows Jona Shah, the Khan-e-Jahan, firmly seated in the state in the upper register. On his right stand two attendants, one of whom has a fan in his hand. On his left stands an official who bows towards him slightly. The second register shows courtiers or subjects of the Khan-e-Jahan who discuss and praise their leader's wise and virtuous activities. In the lower register is depicted a bull and a lion harmoniously drinking from a pond in the Khan-e-Jahan's domain. The next painting is Biraspat, describes the beautiful Lorak to Chanda, also from the collection of Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Chanda, the heroine of Lord Chanda, had been married to Bhavan, but upon discovering that he was blind in one eye and lacked manhood, she returned home. One day Chanda fell madly in love with Lorak when she caught a glimpse of a grand procession celebrating Lorak and King Sahadev's victory over the army of Roopchand. This painting charmingly illustrates portions of the text. The building mentioned is shown rising from a rectangular pink ground and set against a pale blue sky filled with arabesque. In the upper story, Chanda sits on the right, questioning Biraspat about Lorak as described in verses. A pink ground scattered with gold grass clumps appears behind them. The yellow-skinned Biraspat is dressed in green skirt, blue bodice and a transparent scarf. Chanda is light complexioned and wears a brown skirt, blue sash, green bodice and a transparent scarf. She sits on pink pillow or round carpet decorated with magenta floral patterns. In the lower floor stands at half open door small serving girl peeking out at Lorak's possessions. Her body faces left but her head and shoulders are turned towards the yellow-skinned Biraspat who occupies the second arched bay. Likewise, Biraspat's body faces the small girl but her head and arms are turned towards Chanda who stands facing the two women in the arched bay on the right. Biraspat seems to be describing the beautiful Lorak to Chanda as she watches him through the door opened by the small maidservant. The verse on the back records the moment when Chanda, upon seeing Lorak, falls deeply in love with him. Another beautiful pre-Mughal painting is from Bhagavad Puran titled Krishna Killing Demon Vyamasura 1550 in the collection of National Museum, New Delhi. The other painting is of Krishna, the butter thief, pre-Mughal Bhagavad Puran dated to 1550 and in the collection of Bharat Kala Bhavan, Banaras. Here Krishna was painted twice to record the narrative continuity, transgressing the limits of time and space. The vibrant scarlet background emphasizes the principal unit of the composition, whereas to the left the seated milkmaid exchanged a dialogue through hand gestures. Every detail retains the qualities of spiritual draftsmanly handling and the architecture has distinctly defined registers. To conclude, one can say that the picture that emerges from the above description suggests that a common school of painting, independent of the upbranch school, existed in the 16th century. While including local variation, it encompassed a large portion of the western and central regions as well as Madhya Desha, the middle India. This style in turn gave birth to popular sub-schools discovered later at different centers like Malwa, Mewar, Bundi, etc. in the 16th and 17th century.